Okay, today we're going to learn how to configure EIGRP using a Cisco 2691 router. We're going to use the program called GNS Free, which is freely available. If you type it into Google, you'll find a link to it. You will have to find an iOS for the router which you'll be configuring, unless of course you have the original hardware. It's exactly the same configuration. The only difference is you'll have to connect the cables manually, whereas in the program, obviously you can do this a lot quicker and it's more automated. Okay, I'm going to fire up GNS Free now, and after a few moments we get a project name come up, and for all intents and purposes I'm going to call it EIGRP. I'm going to put test, purely because I've already got one called EIGRP. I'm going to click onto OK, and then we have got various routers, bridges, switches and stuff like that. Now just be aware, if you haven't installed the iOS, you won't be able to use any of the routers. The iOS obviously being the software which is needed for the actual router to boot. Now because you're using original software from the router of your choice, basically it'll be identical as if you was configuring the real deal. The only difference being you haven't got all the cables, you haven't got all the mess, and it's far more efficient. Please be aware though that this can be a little bit intensive on computers. So if you're using a computer which is about 7 or 8 years old, you may find it quite difficult to use. I suggest getting something a little bit more powerful. I'm using this on a laptop with a dual core 2 Pentium inside, so it works okay. I can probably set up to 10 different routers at one stage, so more than adequate for what we need to do. Okay, so we're going to fire and add 3 of these routers. We just click and hold with the left mouse button and we drag onto the screen. For whatever reason it takes a few seconds for that to drop onto the screen for the first one. Now we're going to drop again the same model. So this is the only iOS I have installed at the moment, and I'm going to click a third on there. You can see above it's got R1, R2, R3, meaning router 1, 2 and 3. Okay, now I'm going to click on the add link button, which is here. Okay, and because I know these have got fast Ethernet ports on them, that's obviously the selection I'm going to take. Obviously if you've got an earlier model, you might only have a standard Ethernet with 10 megabits. If you're doing a point of sale service, manual, not entirely sure, obviously ATM if you're into auto transaction machines, and if you've got gigabit Ethernet routers, you're very lucky. Very few people can afford to buy such things, but you know, good luck if you've got one. Maybe you might want to send me a link and I'll buy one off you if you want to sell it cheaply. Okay, so I'm going to click on Fast Ethernet anyway. Okay, click onto R1. You can let go with the mouse button. You'll see when you pull away from it, you get a cable. Okay, click onto router 2. It'll automatically attach itself. Now this is still selected up here. Okay, so click on router 2 to router 3, and then we're going to use the other port from here to here. Okay, so we've now got like a triangular effect on screen. Now at the moment all these are red because obviously they're not powered on, they're not converged. It takes a little time for it to converge, so I'm going to click on what's the play button here, start or resume devices, and after probably about 15 seconds you'll notice that these turn green. It just means they're all powered on and ready to be configured. Okay, now before we go on to the next bit, just let that start. You can see they've all turned green now, and the same over here. Okay, we need to click on this, otherwise we're going to still have the cable tool selected. Now at the moment I don't know what port is what. I click onto this tool here, which is show interface labels, and you can now see which port is which port. Obviously that does help a lot. Okay, we're going to set up 3 different networks for our EIGRP to talk to one another, and we're going to start by configuring router 1. Now if you just double click onto the router itself, okay, you get a console come up like this, which is You haven't seen it load because I've used what's called an unpacked iOS, so it actually loads a lot quicker. And if you're using emulation like I am, it's a very good idea to get the unpacked version. There is a tool actually on the GNS site, so when you get your iOS, which will be in a bin file to begin with, you can then use that tool to extract it, and obviously then you import that into GNS. Okay, there's plenty of guides on the GNS website, so I'm not going to cover that now. I might do that at a later stage in a different video. Okay, so hopefully you're up to this stage. Now, because I'm using Windows 7, I assume if you're using Windows 8, I'm not really up on Windows 8, but if you're using Windows 8 and Windows 7, you can drag screens to the left, and then obviously when the screen goes a funny colour like that, you can let go, and it automatically resizes it to fit next to what you're doing. Okay, I'm going to do the same on this one, even though it's fitting, because I didn't do that to begin with, it just so happens it's in the right place. Okay, and you can see the two side by side, and you can work and you can see what you're doing, which is a far better way of doing this. Okay, I'm going to click on R2 as well. The same thing will happen again. I'm just going to click and drag that over to there. So we've got R2 on that side, and again we're going to do the same with R3. Just so we've got everything ready to go and it's easier to work with. Okay? Click and drag that over there. Now you can see I'm on R3 at the moment, so I want to configure R1. Now you'll see down the bottom here now, because I've got all these three consoles, you've got grouped windows, okay? Obviously, if you've got XP, you're not going to see this exactly the same, so it's a little bit more difficult. You'll have to resize them manually and put them side by side. But you know, you can still do this. It still will work. It's just a little bit more difficult to switch between each of the devices. Okay, I'm going to go to R1, and you can see at the top here, we're ready to go. Okay. For the first command, obviously, we need to configure the terminal to get to the ports which we're going to be configuring. So, configure terminal. Okay, now you can see that's changed the configuration terminal here, and now we need to decide which interface we're going to configure. Now I'm going to configure F0/0 because that's a fast Ethernet port. Okay, so if I now type in interface fast Ethernet 0/0, okay, I'm now on the configure interface option. Okay. Now in here, I'm going to use this network. I'm going to use 10.122.200, and I'm going to use the first available IP address, which is 1. I'm going to use the subnet mask of 2.0. Okay, so that gives us approximately 1,024 IP addresses. Now I'm hoping if you come to the EIGRP exercise, you do already understand how IP addresses work. Okay. Otherwise, I think you're jumping ahead a little bit too far, and you may want to go back and sort of learn about subnetting and IP addresses. Okay. So anyway, I'm going to press enter now, and it didn't work. And I'll tell you why it didn't work. Purely because I forgot to put IP address. Just put IP in for whatever reason. A bit of a blonde moment. Okay. So IP address. Actually, there's a space in between. Press enter, you can see that's now entered. Now, for that port to actually become active, you have to issue what's called the no shutdown. Bit of a strange command I've always thought. Okay, this actually brings the port up. Okay, and give it a few seconds, and you can actually see link 3 up down, and it's changed the state to the up status. Okay, so now that actual port is actually configured, we need to come back one. So we're typing exit just to come back to the configuration terminal here. We've now already configured fast Ethernet 00, which is this router here, 00. We're now going to come over to fast Ethernet 01. Okay, so we're going to type in interface fast Ethernet 01. Okay, and now for this network, I'm choosing to use a Class C network address, which obviously is a 192.168. I'm going to use 1.1.255.255.255.0 as a subnet mask. Okay. So just always make a note of the networks we are configuring. You can follow this guide through, and you can zip back and forward through it if you like. Obviously, I didn't have that choice. Okay, so I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head. So if I do make mistakes, do just bear with me. Okay. Now if I click on enter, obviously I'll come to the configure interface again, and obviously I need to bring this port up and then shut down. Okay. After a few seconds again, you'll see that that link has changed the state to the up state, which is exactly what we are looking for. Okay. Now we are going to configure the EIGRP on this particular router, so we need to come back to the configuration terminal, and to do that we now type in router EIGRP, and I'm going to put, there's an autonomous system number which you put after this. Now by default normally it's 90, which is what EIGRP uses. You need to read up a little bit about what this actually does. I will be doing videos on this and explaining this in more detail. So just for argument's sake, just bear with me and just use the number 90. We're going to use this on all the routers, the same configuration, okay? Now, what we now need to do, now we've got to this part, is add the particular networks to the EIGRP, okay? So it's actually got a list of the networks which are contained on this router, okay, for advertising purposes to each of its neighbours. This being a neighbour, and obviously that being a neighbour because these are the cables which are connected. Okay, now we're going to type in network, and we're going to start the 10.122.200.0. Okay, now we have to use what's called a wildcard mask. Okay, again, something you should actually study before, and something you should know a little about if you've done your IP addressing and stuff like that prior. Okay, so because I've used a 252 subnet mask actually on this interface on the 10.122.200 network, it's a my wild card would be 0.0.0.3. Okay, press enter on that. Now you don't see actually anything happen at this stage, obviously, because we haven't configured any of the other routers, so you can't see anything what's going to happen as of yet. But later on you'll see where we're going with this. Okay. Now we need to add our second network, obviously fast Ethernet 01, which is 192.168.1.0, and the wildcard mask is 0.0.0.255. Okay, basically because there's 255 addresses available to this particular network. Okay, not usable IP addresses, just available. So that's including your broadcasting network address. Okay, so now I'm going to press enter on there, and you've probably been told this by your tutor if you've had a tutor in the past, or when you learn, ensure that once you've configured the settings and you're happy and you think everything's looking okay, that you write this to the memory in the router. Okay, now we can come back to the R1 route if we wish, but a quicker way to do this is just to type in do and write, and then we don't need to come back, it should just write that configuration. Okay, so that is actually done now. The R1 side of things is actually complete. So we're going to come back down to here now where our various routers are, and we're going to come to router 2. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing again basically. Obviously the IP addresses will be different. Configure T will give you the terminal command as well. You don't have to type it all in, it's just so you know the differences really, and the shortcuts which can be made. Okay, so configure T brings you to the configure terminal. Okay, now I'm on R2, I'm going to come to F0/0 as the interface. Okay, so I'm going to go to interface F0/0. Okay, and I'm going to add the IP address of 10.122.200.2. It's the second IP address in the range. Always find if you follow suit, it's easier to actually track what IP addresses are being used in the future, so you're not wasting any addresses. Okay, it's a 252 subnet, if you remember, in router 1. I'm going to press enter at that stage, and I'm going to put no shutdown. Okay, no SH is exactly the same. Okay, exit to come back one, and we're going to go to interface F0/1. Now this time I'm going to put an address of 172, so I'm going to use a class B network this time, 16.1.1. Okay, and I'm just going to use the standard mask. Okay, although this network will allow you to add a 0.0 mask, and you've got a lot more IP addresses available should you need them. Okay. But if I was configuring more than 172 network, obviously if I was to put 0.0 here, I couldn't configure any other router with a 172.16, say .2.1 address, because it has already been used that network with. Okay, so this is why the subnet mask is so important. Okay, I'm going to come there, and again, no shutdown. Bring the port up. Okay, now you can see that the state has moved to up. We're going to go exit, come back one, and again we're going to type router EIGRP. The autonomous system number we used last time was 90, and we're now going to add the networks which are on this router. Okay, so for this time we need a 172, a 16, a 1.0 network with a 0.00255 wildcard mask. Okay. We're going to type in the network of the other, which is 10.122.200.0, and if you remember, it's 0.0.0.3 for the wildcard mask because of the 252.0 subnet mask on that interface. Okay? And if we just issue a do write, just to point out here, dual NBR change EIGRP neighbour. So it's actually picked up that it's got one neighbour. The reason it hasn't picked this neighbour up yet is because this isn't configured. Okay, so we're going to do a do write just so we can make sure that configuration stays in memory. And we're going to come to router 3 and we're going to do the similar thing again. Okay, so configure T. Then we're going to go to interface. We're going to go to F0/0 this time. Okay. Now if you remember, this is a 172 network, so I'm going to add IP address 172.1.16.1.2 255.255.50. Okay, so that's a mask we used on the router, this neighbour router. Again, issue a no shut. Okay, should bring that port up after a few seconds. Okay. So that's done that now. And now we're going to come to interface F0/1. Okay. Bringing this port here. Now if you remember, on this particular router we used the 192 network over this side, so hopefully if I'm doing everything right, I should type in IP 192.168.1.2, so that's the second address available to us. .0, and again I forgot to put address in again. I'm not sure what's happening today. I think I might need to go and get some more of that dye for my hair. Okay. Again, issue the no shut command. Okay, and now exit to come back one. You can see the ports come up again, and this time I'm going to do router EIGRP again. Autonomous system number is 90, we're matching all the routers. Okay, and now we're going to add the networks which are on this device. Okay, again, same as before, 192.168.1.0, 0.0.0.255 for the net mask, or wildcard mask as some people call it. And we're going to add the second network. You can also see now, because I've added that network, that this neighbour has been detected. Okay, now I'm going to add what's hopefully the final network. It's the 172.16.1.0, 0.0.0.255 again for the wildcard mask, sorry. And you can see exchange for neighbour, it's now come up, and you can see each one of these devices. Okay, final thing to do here, obviously well, it's not the final thing, but this is the final thing to make sure you've written all the information to the router memory, is a do a write configuration. Building configuration has been done. Okay, now I always find it's best, it doesn't matter which order you do this in, that we absolutely certain that all of these are configured and they can see one another. Okay, and an easy way of doing that is I'm going to come back to R1, which is our router 1, and I'm going to give a control and press C just to come back, obviously, to the the root of the router. Bit of a silly statement, I must admit. Okay. Now what we're going to do what's called show IP EIGRP neighbours. Okay. Now I'm on this, so it should actually see that we've got a neighbour here and we've got a neighbour there. Okay. So we should have two neighbours on each router. Okay, and you can see there that we've got 192.168.1.2, which is that router. Okay, and F0/1, 10.122.200.2, okay, which is on fast Ethernet 00 on this router, okay, which was the number we configured on there. So we know that this router is absolutely fine, and just as a quick test, if we type in ping and we try to ping that port, okay, we're going to do a 10.122.200.2 just to see, and you can see the success rate is fine. There's no problems there, and we'll do the same for the other port just to check it's 168. There's no need to really, because we can see that they're actually up. But I just like to make sure. Okay. You can see success rate there again. So now we're going to come to router 2. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to press Control and C just to get back to the root of the router. Okay, and then again we're going to do show IP EIGRP neighbour. Okay. Again we should have two, and we have. Okay, so you can see we're on router 2. Our neighbour this time from here is 10.122.200.1, which is showing down here. Okay, and then our other neighbour is 172.16.1.2, which is this neighbour here. Okay, again we can try this out if we wish. We can just do a ping to any one of those ports really. 172.16.1.2. Okay, you can see that one works, and we may as well do the other port, the neighbour port I should say, just to check that works. Okay, and obviously now we just need to come to router 3 just to you know, ensure that all of these ports are up. Normally you wouldn't be able to ping if there were any problems, but occasionally you can. It's not always the case. Okay, so don't just assume because you can ping it will work. You want to make sure that those neighbours are up and running, and obviously it's the correct neighbours which they're showing as well. If I had another port connected here, obviously I could have 3 neighbours and there's only 2 of them showing. We know that one of those is not functioning correctly. Okay. Okay, so this time we're going to press Control and C again. Okay, and show IP EIGRP neighbours. Okay, again we can see that both of these ports are up. We can see that the 172.16.1.1 network, which is here on that port, and we can see the 192.168.1.1 address, which is this port here, obviously the neighbour port of this router and the neighbour port of this router. Okay, so just the final test, obviously, just to make sure we've done everything correctly. We're going to ping each of those ports again. Okay, success again, absolutely fine, and we're going to do the 192.168.1.1 of this. Okay. And there you have it. Okay, we can see that what we've actually done is configure 3 routers in a triangular path, configuring EIGRP with an autonomous system number of 90. The 3 networks of choice which I used, router 1 being 10.122.200.0 network with a 192.168.1.0 network. Router 2 is a 10.122.200.1.0 network with a 172.16.1.0 network. And for the purposes of finally, we've got the R3 router, which is a 172.16.1.0 network again, with a 192.168.1.0 network. Okay. Remember, do a Google on GNS3. Obviously, you're not going to find the iOS on there. I can't tell you how to find it, but if you have got an old router, you could extract the iOS from that if you know how to do that. There's plenty of guides on the internet if you don't. There is a far easier way of doing this. For all intents and purposes, I'm not allowed to tell people how to access it because Cisco are not very nice at sharing out their iOS software for whatever reason. I don't know, but because of the legality behind it, these are the reasons I can't tell you where to go. But obviously, if you look hard enough, you will find it if that's the path you choose to take. But I take no responsibility should you get caught in doing it that way. I'm using the router C2691. You can find the iOS off the internet if you can, but any one of these models will do. They will have varying commands, but for the EIGRP status, all of these routers can use these commands which we've just covered. Okay, there are ways of putting other routers and stuff on here, but there's no real need really. Okay, just remember to use the unpack tool once you've found the iOS, again, which is on the GNS site. Very important that you do that, otherwise the emulator will run very slow and you'll have to watch each one of these boot up like a real router. So it's going to be a pain up the bum basically. It's going to take, you're going to have to wait 2 minutes for each one of these routers to boot up. And when you're running 3 routers together, obviously that's going to slow down even more and it's going to take even further time. Of which, you know, we want to try and avoid because we know how a router boots up. We don't need to see it every time. But obviously in the real world, you wouldn't be able to do it that way. You would have to actually wait for that router to actually converge into the network before you could actually start the commands. Okay, I hope that covers everything on this part of the course. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe to my channel. Please, no abusive messages. I'm doing this free of charge. I'm not asking anybody for any cash. I'm not brilliant. I don't, protest to be the best out there. But what I'm doing is just to make people, make it easier for people to configure these things, rather than doing it a difficult way and having to go through pages and pages of study. And sometimes you just don't understand what they're getting at. Okay. Thank you for listening. My name's Matthew, and please look at my channel. Goodbye.